what does it look like to have somebody whose metabolism is broken? That performance of metabolism is linked to what their struggles with their GI system have been.
It starts with a propensity for obesity, then there's pre-diabetes, and then there's type 2 diabetes. The fact is that when you're metabolizing your foods better and you have this metabolic health more optimized, your GI actually improves.
Colleen Cutcliffe is a PhD and is an expert in all things gut biome and the bacteria that should be in your bowel and what happens when it's not there. But it wasn't until I used your product that I saw patients saying, I do feel my brain's working right. We weren't chasing brain, we were chasing the bowel.
If I had known that all that had to happen, I'm not sure I would have started this company. But the great news is,
well, today I am super excited to welcome back again something I rarely do, which is bring an influencer and an educator back on my channel to talk more in depth about what her expertise is. As an incredible skeptic that these probiotics that my patients spend a ton of money on, well, I saw them as a scam. I saw them as things that do not actually reverse the health problems that they're looking for. And I would use evidence that says, look, let's watch what's in your gut biome. Let's do that test. And then I'm going to have you eat a different way. And it was completely different within 3 weeks. And it was after the research that I read that she had helped bring to light and to help pour the money and time into that truly has opened my eyes to a place where you should put time, money, and resources if you're trying to improve this problem. So welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love having conversations with people who started as skeptics and then really used evidence to try to see are things working or not working. So Dr. Boz, thank you so much for having me back on and being such a voice of information for people.
Well, thank you. You know, I'll have you jump to the cliff notes that we really covered in last time, which is when I look at the scam processes and you look at the, how many colonies per million you grow of bugs and the way they measure these tools or these products and the tools they were using to judge which one's better, which one's worse. Is it refrigerated? It must be better if you keep it in the refrigerator. And then to listen to how your product separated. And please don't leave out the part about you have to grow it without oxygen. So I'm sure you wouldn't leave that out. But so why is yours different?
Absolutely. Well, I think at a very high level, it is the products that we've been working on are going after your metabolism. So we have the only products on the market, which are microbiome interventions that are clinically proven to help your metabolism. And so I think there are a lot of sort of marketing angles on, refrigeration is better or more CFUs are better and things like that. But when we tackled this problem, we started almost 12 years ago, we really said, what are the functions of the microbiome and what is maybe missing in people that is causing them to experience kind of these disease states or less than optimal health states? And how do we start to tackle from a functional standpoint? And so I think, when you think about things like root cause, it's not about like how many colonies you have. It's about what can your microbiome do? And what can your microbiome not do? And how do we help you get all the full gamut of functions that your microbiome needs? And then just, really quick to hone in on what your microbiome might not be doing. It might not be helping you metabolize the food that you're eating optimally. It might not be providing you with the gut lining that helps you with a wide variety of inflammatory and immune issues. It might not be helping you to stimulate GLP-1 hormone. And so all of these things are important things that your microbiome plays a pivotal role in, and yours might not be doing that. And if you gave it back those functions, you would all of a sudden have these capabilities. And that's really what we've been focused on.
Right. And it is powerful to look at the link that as a physician, internal medicine, taking care of tough problems for over 2 decades, you watch how much that poop history, that bowel history, that performance of metabolism is linked to what their struggles with their GI system have been. And so you don't miss it. It's impossible to miss when you're in the front line saying, yeah, I get that there's still a chronic diarrhea, that your stools float, that things aren't working right. And we know that you're wasting that nutrients out the backside without putting it into the body, and we can measure in your body it's not getting to where I want it to. So when you looked at some of the first places where you said we have something, we are truly going to change how seeding this what I call as a collection of, Akkermansia gets all the star studs, and everybody today seems to know what that word is, but it really is this collection of microbiome and sporinated, oxygen free, so is really part of the critical ways you're getting the outcome. So tell me where you knew this is going to change things. This is going to change the discussion.
Yeah, I think there's a few points where we knew there was something important here. So the first is where the gut microbiome is and where the probiotics reside that are on the shelves today. So the gut microbiome, when we talk about that, it's actually in the distal colon, which means like you get through the stomach, you get through the entire GI tract, and in the very end, the distal part, the distal colon, that's where all the action is happening when we talk about the microbiome. So all the probiotics that are on the shelves right now are things that are culturable, meaning that they're actually residing in these other parts of the GI tract. But the gut microbiome, when you get to that distal colon, there's actually no oxygen there. And so these guys that are doing all this action, a bunch of them, they can't even survive when there's oxygen around. And so I think the first thing we knew is, okay, we're now looking at the place where all the actual metabolism is happening. And then we know that they're sort of living in a different environment there. Some of them are living embedded in the mucin layer. Some of them can't survive with a single molecule of oxygen around. And then, moreover, where we kind of knew that we had hit on something really unique was not just are we looking in the right location, not just do these things grow and have different behaviors, but also genetically and functionally, they are helping us metabolize our foods. And they're helping us metabolize foods that we actually don't encode for anything that can metabolize. They're doing all of that work. And so when we mapped out, in particular, we were really focused on metabolic syndrome from the beginning. But when we started to map it out and we understood that the microbiome is stimulating the entire pathway that leads to insulin response. And we were focused on GLP-1 before anybody knew what GLP-1 was. But this insulin response pathway and the pathway to satiety, these are all actually naturally occurring in your microbiome. We were like, holy smokes, there's an opportunity here to help people who are low or missing these functions. And how do we give them back and really help people get back those functions?
Yeah, you're touching on several things. I look at the folks that I've helped in the last just week and some of the stories that what does it look like to have somebody whose metabolism is broken? Like they don't just have, I put this in quote, leaky gut. They don't have that, permeability that's broken down, a mucin layer that's broken. Yep, that's there, but they haven't quite made it to Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, but they have a gut that is not working right. They usually have such insulin resistance that, they're just insulin soaked, and their brain isn't working right. In fact, I had a client just recently who said, I took that GLP-1 Ozempic type drug and I was on the highest dose possible, and it wigged out my brain. I've heard this more than once, but his story was beyond something I've heard in the years we've seen Ozempic hit the market and just be a wildfire to say, hey, we want to manipulate the hormones of suppressing our appetite, of enhancing our ability to get rid of that fat in patients. And when we're using this really high core, intense treatment that Ozempic is designed to do, well, that GLP-1, yes, it is this magical thing that's happening in that oxygen-free part of your gut, but it talks to your brain. It is part of how your motor runs. And when you push that lever 100 miles an hour from zero, you have brains that are not ready for that. When you're looking at some of the benefits that you've seen, adding this to patients, let's start with just the metabolic syndrome patients. When you're looking at some of your studies, and I know some of my audience has heard this before, what do you think the most, when you're trying to, let's say you're trying to talk your mom into taking this drug and she's got insulin resistance, what do you think is going to happen first when she starts taking this drug? I shouldn't say drug, this probiotic. Yeah, there you go.
It's interesting. I love your analogy about, pedal to the metal with these GLP-1 drugs, because I think there is a time where you need to get pedal to the metal, and there are times where you need to slow down. And so the idea that, you put a brick on that pedal with these drugs and you can't actually modulate it is part of the challenge. And it's not right for everybody. And people know that. And there's a place and a time for those drugs. We have been very interested in thinking about metabolic syndrome as really a spectrum. And it starts with, a propensity for obesity. Then there's obesity. Then there's pre-diabetes. And then there's type 2 diabetes. And we're all somewhere on this spectrum.
Yes, we are.
And as we age, we become higher and higher risk of moving down the line on this spectrum. And so we've really been thinking about how do we help people who are all the way at, I have metabolic syndrome, who really need this full, help, all the way to people who are becoming more and more at risk. And I put myself in this category, which is as we age, we don't need doctors to tell us or any diagnostic tests to tell us our metabolism is slowing down. We know that that's happening. And we know that our food cravings get a little bit weirdo. We all of a sudden start craving different things at different times that we maybe didn't have to battle before. We know we experience brain fog. We know we have that post-lunch slump. We know our sleep is a little bit off. It used to be easier to just sleep through the night, and now we're getting all these wake-up periods. All of these are the things that are tied to not having the optimal metabolism.
Right.
And so we say, how do you convince, your mom that you should be trying this product? It sort of depends on where on the spectrum she is. If you're saying well, mom, your A1C is high and your blood glucose levels are high, and do you really want to be on these 12,000 different drugs? Or can we also try a natural approach to lower A1C and blood glucose spikes? That's one thing. But what comes along with improving your gut microbiome and improving these functions is all those other soft benefits.
Right.
So what will you experience out of the get-go? Well, it turns out that, and we really don't lean a whole bunch into GI symptoms, but the fact is that when you're metabolizing your foods better and you have this metabolic health more optimized, your GI actually improves. And so one of the first things people often experience is better bowel movements. So less diarrhea, less constipation, less bloating, less pain, more ability to eat the foods that they used to not be able to eat. And so I think you can start to experience oftentimes initially the GI response. But if you're really kind of one of those people that pays attention, you'll also notice things like reduced brain fog, more sustained energy because you're not on this all day long. If you're a continuous glucose monitor, which I know I love what you're got going on here.
I'm not usually this crazy. It's just I'm solving a puzzle with those.
I love that. But that's really, we all have to get that disciplined about our own health. But if you're measuring your glucose and you're seeing, these certain foods spike me, you might start to see improvements there. Better sleep. You don't have that post-lunch slump. All those things that I mentioned before, these are things that you can start to recognize are improving before you start to see your A1C. And it takes 90 days for your A1C cells to turn over. So you kind of have to wait that 9 days. But before then, these are all the things that you will recognize are changing when you're not on this roller coaster of glucose highs and glucose lows.
Well, I'll give you some insight to the audience that I take care of in my practice, but also that tunes into my YouTube channel. And that is, we don't want them waiting for that A1C to be abnormal. We're really pushing patients, and I have a personal goal of my A1C being, 5.0, 5.1, really blood sugars that in the morning are in that 70 to 80 range. That is healthy. And so, of course, you go to a doctor and say, I want you to recheck my A1C. Last week, last 2 months ago, it was 5.4. They're going to say, I'm not your doc. You go do that on your own. But the power is that blood sugar is a later stage in what happens when insulin isn't working right. And I contend that when patients wait till the A1C is abnormal, we are a decade into abnormal insulin. It is those symptoms that, one of the first things that show up when I look at, women who are either had to, we've got 3 babies in tow, and their brain is doing a lot of things that it needs to do for that family to survive. But that mom is got a clouded vision. Her, that depression from the last baby seems to be only at 80% back to normal, and she's missing it. That the, pinch an inch is now pinch 2 inches. And then there's usually the rumble of gut. Like gut will lead those symptoms, that brain function and gut function. We know they're hyper connected, but it wasn't until I used your product that I saw patients saying, yeah, I do feel my brain's working right. We weren't chasing brain, we were chasing the bowel, and how well that was just if I if I pushed them to do something like, I just want you to eat sardines for 3 days. We're gonna take away the joy of food and just have sustainable food for 3 days and watch what happens. And first of all, their brain did work a little better, but the bowel would be very quick to have loose stools after such a dramatic shift in their intake. And it was highly correlated to the people who've got plenty of insulin problems. They've got, I don't need an A1C to say that's the only way we're going to say you've got metabolic syndrome. Their blood sugars were above 100 in the morning. They just couldn't seem to get the good night's sleep. Their metabolism wasn't healthy. And as I'm pushing the metabolism with a diet that, easy to explain, sardines only for 3 days, the number one clue that I would have that things are a little more messed up than I thought is what happens to their bowels. The bowel couldn't handle that. And, it's been your product where I said, I know this is an expensive buy. I really do push them to do what I think of as the highest dose per pill, which is the glucose control, and say, yeah, I want you to seed your gut with the right microbiome seeds that are actually evidence-based. And let's see what your life is like in 3 months. And we really test that end of it with what happens if I do 3 days of sardines now? And it's remarkable how many of them said, wow, not only is my brain clearer, but I feel that much, the bowel just doesn't, it didn't have the little problems, and it was able to deal with the sardines for 3 days, I guess you could say.
Well, and I think that's there's two things you hit on there that I think are super important. The first thing is that your bowel movements are one of the most powerful diagnostic tests of what's happening on the inside of your body. And, it's funny because we can get a little gross here, but, I wonder, I'll ask you this. So now we'll get personal.
Perfect.
Have you ever pooped and then looked back in the toilet bowl to see, like, what does my poop look like?
Yeah, that's a normal human thing.
That's a normal human thing. Have you ever been annoyed that there was too much toilet paper in there and you couldn't see your poop?
Hey, I need the data. I need the status report of how I'm doing.
Exactly. And you are not alone. We all do that. And
right.
If people are listening, you're being honest, you do that. We all do that. And why are we doing that? Why are we looking at our poop all the time? Why are we annoyed that the toilet paper is in the way? And this is, of all the diagnostic tests that are out there, and I love CGMs and everything that we've been able to create. But the diagnostic test of your poop is the most powerful and the oldest diagnostic test out there. And what you're looking for is that little cavewoman part of your brain is creating baseline. It's creating baseline of what is it supposed to look like. And when there's change, there's like little things that go off in your head. You're like, my poop doesn't look right. Why does that create panic for people? It's because what it's really telling you is there's something on the inside that isn't working right, whether it's with your metabolism or your brain or your cardiovascular, status. That's what your stool is telling you. And so it does matter. Your poop matters. And it's an important part of your diagnostic testing toolkit. So you see that change makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, you said there were two things that I touched on. I want to cover that before you go to the second point, which is when patients come to ask me, should I get my gut biome tested and which option should I do? And, how do I test this? I first say, just do something very simple. Give me a week's diary of what your poop is doing. And when you pay attention to that, I got enough of the history that I'm going to save you the $500 and say, I want you to do these things before we spend the money on that, because we know when you've got that, especially the pattern of you challenge, you shift a nutrient like you do. You have a can of sardines, not just 3 days of it. Something that's high fat, high protein. We are evolutionarily designed to really extract that into our bodies. And when it causes diarrhea in you, there's more to this story than just let me fix your gut biome. It's that history of just study your stools. It's cheap. It's already wired into your brain. And I learn a lot from it.
Oh yeah, it's free. It's definitely the easiest way to. I love that you do that because we know. There are scales that have been developed to help you understand, where on the scale am I, and it's easy to monitor, and you're doing it, presumably all the time. So that's the first thing is how important your stool is, and that is a signal that there's something going wrong inside your body, and it could be a myriad of things. The second thing that you pointed to, which is I think super important is the link between the food that you're eating and the microbiome that you have. I mean, it's like a car. It's not just about, if you want to have a high performing car, it's not just about putting in the top tier fuel. It's about having that amazing engine under the hood. And so here, the fuel is really the food that you eat, and the engine is your microbiome. And if you have a fully functioning microbiome that has all of these different strains that are doing the important work that needs to be done in metabolizing your food, and you're putting in the right food, now you've got a high performing body. And those two things have to be thought of together.
You know, one of my other good colleagues is Sean Baker, known for his, incredible mass of a human being that is sourced and fueled only by meat. And, we've been on panels together where the question is, why do you two not talk about fiber? And I really, I have been an internist. You know how many bran muffins and ways that, the guidelines of 30 grams of fiber a day. And all I was doing was making people sicker. Their insulin was so high that all that fiber was doing, especially like we needed this massive amount of it, they weren't digesting it. It was coming out the other end without any digestion. They weren't healthy. And as both Sean and I address this many times, but especially on our channels, is the human gut is incredibly adaptable. And that when your body shows up to my clinic and you have already had enough insulin and carbohydrates for 2 lifetimes, we are going to try to really help restore those mitochondria inside all of the cells of your body, but especially the cells in your brain, to do the performance they should be doing. And part of that is, I want you to do nothing wasteful or nothing that is really difficult for your gut to extract the nutrients from. We're going to go as close to an animal-based diet as you can get. And of course, Sean takes that to the next level of saying that's all they do. He and I have said many times, when you look at the journey of a patient who has been on high fiber, and then they change the diet to something that is very, you can call it carnivore, you can call it keto, but it's really on the spectrum of very few grams of fiber. It's kind of a bumpy road. That they've usually got diseased processes. That mucin layer is not healthy. And I've learned that when I see the patients who really struggle with that, in a perfect world, I tell them to get on the ketogenic diet, get that grams of carbohydrates to 20 grams per day, 20 total grams per day for at least 2 weeks, and then assess your bowels. You're going to have some shifts in there, but if the bowels are not healthy at the end of those 2 weeks, if you're really seeing a struggle, this is where I would be putting in that glucose control. What do you think that introduction is doing to the mucin layer of their gut when you get them into there's no fiber around anymore? And I know that it needs fiber to do that, to do its best job. But what do you think, why do you think it works? It works really well, but why do you think it works without fiber?
Well, actually, one of the interesting things about Akkermansia, and I know it is the star, but there is a whole team around it, but let's hone in on Akkermansia for a second, is that this is actually linked to one of the challenges we had with growing it. Akkermansia is the only strain that we know of that lives in the mucin layer and consumes mucin while also signaling to regenerate new mucin. So, I've likened this to a fence, I think, the last time we talked, which is that you have these, wooden planks and you have the glue that holds those planks together. And if that glue gets weak, those planks can start to fall, and then you've got a leaky fence. And so the gut lining structurally is actually exactly the same. You have these epithelial cells, and that are the planks, and you have this glue that holds them together, which is the mucin layer. And mucin is really derived from animal byproducts. And so Akkermansia is the only strain that we know that lives in that mucin layer, and all day and all night, it regulates that glue. It strips away the old glue when it gets old, and it puts new glue up, and that keeps your planks, your gut lining, structurally optimal. If you are low or missing akkermansia, you do not have that function. And so it doesn't matter what you're doing, you are going to be lacking in that structural integrity of your gut lining. And that can show up for people in a wide variety of ways. That can show up as metabolic issues, that can show up as GI issues, that can show up as cognitive issues. And so we know there's like thousands of publications showing the link between all these different diseases from the brain to the stomach to the metabolism. If you have those issues, you're low or missing akkermansia because it's just a core strain. So what's happening here in this situation is if you don't have akkermansia or you're low in it, you're building up this mucin layer, but you don't have the guy there that's regulating it to like tear it down when it's old and replenish it. And so if you're missing that regulator, then your mucin layer, to your point, your gut lining continues to be disrupted. And you're seeing that show up in the form of these bowel movements still being problematic. So I think for these individuals, when you're introducing these strains, and particularly akkermansia, you're giving them back the regulators because now you've just given them the food, but you don't have the guy who's consuming it and helping you build your gut lining. And so I think I love your 1-2 punch, which is let's first start with the diet. And if you're still having GI issues, maybe it's these organisms that are missing. And now you've got the engine tied with the food and you're getting this high performing vehicle.
Well, I'll tell you, after the first time we did this talk, and I had, again, I think Peter Attia was the first guy who really helped me to see past, the instant somebody would say microbiome, I would tune out. Like, okay, I have studied this so many times and I don't believe you. I've been to the science researchers and I would get up to the microphone and I would ask some of the questions about, well, what do you think that the required, bacteria that should be in the bowel, which ones are in the healthy people? And it was such a terrible, trashed answer. I was like, I don't believe it. I don't believe what you're saying. I don't believe what you're saying. And then this discovery was, okay, I'm going to give this a chance again. This sounds like evidence. And I started, prescribing this, but offering it to patients, especially in that setting. And I've seen folks get to that third week of a ketogenic diet and give up because their bowels were so, really destructive. I mean, they were headed towards an ulcerative type of disease, and they didn't know that, but this is the pattern I've seen over the years. And when I would typically say, start taking this in somebody who isn't quite as methodical about their blood sugars, like they're on and off the diet, I wasn't getting, I had a few do that. They didn't notice much. But when they were on a ketogenic diet and they were steadily saying, this is the food I'm eating, and they had that rumble. I mean, I know it's supposed to take several weeks to make a big difference, but within like 7 days, they were like, I don't know what this is doing to me, but this is incredible. And it was so rewarding for me as a physician to say, I know that I want to spend my life with at least producing ketones multiple times a week. I hope that I could say it's going to be a ketogenic diet till I die, but I am human. I have, temptations. But mostly, I never want to be off of a ketogenic status long enough to see my mucin layer do what these patients have shown me over the years. And when they get to these stages, some people go on a ketogenic diet, they don't have any problems. And even the ones who've had like severe, we're ready to cut out their colon. They have ulcerative colitis for 1.5 feet. This is disastrous. The only option is surgery. And yet they healed from that. But that's the rare person. The ones that come to me and we've got bowel issues, within 2 weeks, if things aren't going well, I know we've got a bumpy road ahead. And it has been such a game changer to say, I know it's expensive, but I need you to invest in this. You're going to see a dramatic improvement. Please do not add back a bunch of carbohydrates. The insulin and that inflammatory kind of cytokine storm that comes with that high insulin in this patient will break down that mucin as fast as you're making it in your gut. But these seeds will really restore that. And I just can't, my patients, on behalf of my patients and your product, we thank you for your product. It has really improved the outcome for many of my patients.
Oh, I love hearing that. And it's funny to me to hear that, it's really the bowel movements that are driving people to try the product. And then they're seeing that improvement because, and I know under the hood, it's not just that. Like we're really helping them to have this more structured gut lining. We're helping them to produce the GLP-1 hormone at the levels it needs to be produced. So there's all these other, like the actual benefits, but what it shows up at it as you can't feel when your blood sugar levels are out of whack. And so but what you can feel flows when your GI is restored. And so I love that. I think that is it's so amazing. And I do want to point to this price thing for a second here, because I know that it's super expensive, that's a pain point for us, and we hear that all the time. And we are not trying to fleece people. We literally, when we first launched product, we were losing money on every bottle that we sold. My investors were like, "Do you know how to do math?" And so I think the problem is that they're really expensive to make because of this needing to be oxygen free. We had to build a plant because nobody else in the world could actually grow these strains. So we said we really want to understand how these strains work. We have to figure out how to manufacture them. So we built a manufacturing plant that was not in the original game plan. And we have to grow these things in an oxygen-free environment. They're very finicky. We want to get them into a pill format. I mean, there's a lot of steps here, which is like, first, you have to get the strains out of the gut microbiome. You have to be able to grow them in this oxygen-free environment. Then we have to be able to freeze dry them. They have to live through that freeze drying process. We have to get them into a pill, and we have to put in a pill that's going to get back to the gut microbiome. So our pills are actually enteric coated to get through the stomach acid, and they have a time-delayed release so that they get all the way to the distal colon. Then they have to release, and then these guys have to come back to life. We put food in there for them, so there is a little bit of prebiotic in there for them to be able to come back to life and then do their work. So there's all these steps, which honestly, if I had known that all that had to happen, I'm not sure I would have started this company. But the great news is you can get all of that, but it is expensive to make. So thank you for anyone who has tried the product. And I promise you, we are working so hard to try to make the cost of the product lower. And as soon as we can crack the nut on that, that's going to translate to a lower price. So just, if you can get on the product now to reap the benefits, I promise you we are working on that.
Oh, well, it truly was the other part of the equation where I said, I know these are anaerobic. And when I would look at Akkermansia products on the shelf because I'd read about this and I said, okay, maybe I should offer this. And you say, well, if you take this pill and you check for does it have Akkermansia parts in it? I'm like, okay, great. But they're all chopped up. That's not going to turn into an actual living colony. And then, so the cost was actually one of the sales points when I was first hearing about your company. I'm like, oh yeah, this is real, because this is what it takes. Every time I would have this block saying, they're full of it. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And then I'd had patients saying, well, I went to this chiropractor and they told me to get on Akkermansia, and so I did it, but I'm spending all this money and it's no different. And I'm like, it was very disheartening, because those resources of how do you get a patient better. There's lots of ways patients lose confidence in doctors today, from distrust of policy processes to chronic problems, having really fancy commercials on television that are gonna kill you if you listen to the side effects when you slow it down, but are also that they feel it's the only option. So when I'm saying this drug I believe in, and I know that it's expensive, so I appreciate you recognizing the pain point, but I also want you to know one of the ways I paid attention to you was, oh yeah, it has to be expensive in order for you to get all that stuff in it.
Oh my gosh, it does. Thank you for appreciating that. And I would say that this, people going out and figuring out that Akkermansia is something that they need to be replenished with, and then going and trying to, buy it and then saying it doesn't work. It's really sad for me to hear that they then become disheartened with their practitioner, because actually you should be disheartened with Amazon or with the supplements world, because I can tell you that Chris Mason, who's a professor at Cornell, he went and bought all these different Akkermansia products off Amazon, and he did DNA sequencing on all of them. And he said, you're not going to believe this, Colleen. Of the 7 different things that I looked at, only 1 actually has Akkermansia in it, and it's your product. The rest had something else in it. And then the other thing to look out for as a consumer, so just be careful, just be, buyer beware. Just because it says Akkermansia on the label doesn't mean that that's what's inside. And so I think you really have to be careful about that. I don't know, without doing DNA sequencing yourself, how you're going to know, but just beware that there's a bunch of, because of the way the supplements industry works, people can just put things on the market that are mislabeled, and there's almost no repercussions for that, because who's doing that work to sequence things? And the second thing on the buyer beware part is, there are products out there which are pasteurized Akkermansia. And what that means is that they have, if we remember pasteurization, we all love pasteurization because it kills germs. Well, it kills germs, meaning it kills bacteria. And so what these people have done is to heat up the Akkermansia and effectively kill it, and then put it into a bottle, because obviously that's a really nice stable thing as the dead strain. Right. And so be aware that if you want this thing to work with the food you're eating, it has to be
You
alive.
can't
And
swallow the
so,
skeleton. You need to actually swallow the spore or whatever it does when you
yeah, you need it to be alive so it can do the work. It's exactly right. You don't want the skeleton. It's not going to do anything for you with the food that you're eating. So just beware of all those different kind of scams that are out there, which is a bummer to see.
Well, I have a couple of good questions that last time we talked, patients or viewers wrote in. I'm going to tell you what I did because they heard what I did, and then a bunch of people copied me. I said, as soon as I heard it, I said, all right, I'll buy a 3-month supply. I'm going to put it in the fridge, and I will, see if I got all the way to the end. About 2 months in, one of the bottle that I was going on a trip, and I said, "Oh, I'll just pack it." And I took it out of the fridge and I put it in my suitcase, and I wondered, is it still going to be okay that I didn't keep that in the fridge? Because it comes in this refrigerated process, and maybe it still doesn't anymore. We had a hurricane here, and so I have to order it now because all of my supply, I had it on renewal order, and so I got like three renewals, but I had seasons where I just didn't feel like I needed it. It was doing okay, and I was like, I'll save the money and wait till next month and see how it goes. And then there would be times where I think, I should try that again. So what happens if it's not in the fridge?
So now you're getting insider knowledge about the product. So first of all, it can be out of the fridge for 5 days and everybody is still okay. And moreover, there's 5 strains in the formulation. 4 of them are actually room temperature stable. They're going to be fine even if you left your thing out for months. But there is one strain, which is our Diva, who needs to be refrigerated. So once you get past that kind of like 5-day mark, that Diva will start to lose its potency. That being said, that might not be the strain that is the most important for you. And so if you are still getting benefit from the product, even if it's been at room temperature, that's okay. And we really are working on getting that Diva fixed up so that we can say like it's room temperature stable, but it's not like everything in there is going to fall apart if you're at room temperature. First of all, you can go 5 days, so you can definitely throw it in your bag and travel with it. But then second of all, those other 4 strains are actually stable at room temperature. So that's the insider baseball. But the line is you should try to keep it refrigerated all the time.
Yeah, well, every refrigerator in Tampa tanked, so I had like 4 months in there, and I'm like, okay, well, let's start over. I had these bottles at the office, and the office didn't lose power, but so I have a backup plan. So the second major other question that was really interesting, and I didn't know how to answer is, so when patients are taking Ozempic, and so they are really pushing that GLP-1 level to be this, superhuman, beyond superhuman level in their body. What do you recommend for the product during when they're doing that? Like, will it help them?
So we actually, as you know, we have a lot of practitioners that we sell through and to and talk to their patients about it. And we recently asked them, like, how are you handling this? What are you doing? And we found that 78% of them are recommending taking the probiotic along with the drug. And what they're really doing here is they're saying, okay, the drug is sort of injecting you with a chemical mimic of the GLP-1 hormone, and that's got that's one kind of path of treatment. But what we really want to teach your body how to stimulate its own GLP-1 hormone, and that's what this product is doing. So they're basically, even though at the end of the day you're getting this increase in GLP-1, they're doing 2 different kinds of things. And so they're introducing the probiotic in order to stimulate this person's ability to make their own GLP-1. And if you can get those strains to colonize, you really have taught your body to fish. Like, it is going to be able to make its own GLP-1 hormone. And then what they're doing is, after being on the product for about 2 months, they're starting to titrate down the drug, or they're using it as a step off. Have this product so that you don't have these like terrible rebound effects that many people experience. And if they want to do like a step on, step off, they kind of enable people to maintain their natural GLP-1 production, and then they can kind of mess around with the drug dosing and optimize these 2 things together. So that's really how they're using it. And so I think that if you are interested in enabling your body to make its own GLP-1 hormone, that's not at all related to the drug, which is really injecting your body with a chemical mimic of it.
It's very similar, So when I look at how do you use this responsibly, I don't think these GLP-1 injections are going anywhere. And for 2 decades, maybe 15 years or so before the craze, they were in the diabetes medications we were using for patients. They weren't this strong, and you would every once in a while find a patient who would just stop eating. And so there was a clue that this was coming. I think back to some of the most profound stories in my medical career that of patients, they're in that last 5 steps before they're about to die. The ones I think of are Crohn's disease. They're just leaking out food from their gut lining, and it's just awful. It's an awful story, and they got out of that by fasting. They just stopped eating. Every time they ate, their life got worse. And they didn't heal the problem. They really, but they got so profoundly better when they stopped eating that I often think for my patients with gut problems, and Ozempic, they stop eating. One of my favorite stories is this wonderful woman out of Washington, D.C., who is my friend, and she has had every surgery to remove weight that is known to man. And then she finally gets on Ozempic, and she comes around and says, "If this is how little you skinny women eat, I was never going to make it."
I know. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. But it really is that food noise. That's such a huge thing, right? Walking around all day, thinking about, the food that you're not supposed to be eating, but you really want to eat it. It really is being able to quiet that noise, I think is so important. And, when we, look at that, when we think about the story of weight loss, I have a very strong point of view about this whole thing, which is, and I have daughters, and so I may be more sensitive to the whole thing, but I really, really don't like the focus on weight loss because, again, if you could turn 5 pounds of fat into 5 pounds of muscle, that's a major win, but you haven't lost a single pound. And I think it's really important to focus on the food cravings part of this story because that's really where you're going to have a more everlasting change. So if your body is making the right amount of GLP-1 hormone, you will have reduced food cravings of those things that your body doesn't really need. And we actually use the food cravings inventory, which is the diagnostic test for, your food cravings. And we saw that after being on 6 weeks of our formulation, that 91% of people with this test showed an improvement and a reduction in their food cravings for sugars and for carbs. And these are the things that your body really doesn't need, but you crave them. And this is one of the things that I was saying, that as we get older, we start to have weird cravings. Like I've never craved some of those things before. And then all of a sudden you start to crave them. Well, it's because your body's production of GLP-1 and your microbiome might be at fault here. And if you can get that back into the right, cycle, then what it'll show up for you is these reduced food cravings. And what that does is it sets you on an amazing path to make it easier to make good food choices, to reduce the amount of food you're eating, but also eat the right foods. And now you're on a path to true health, because the path to true health can't be like, I just don't eat. And the path to true health can't be, I'm just going to be on drugs for the rest of my life. The path to true health is you're actually craving the right foods for your body, and you've got the right nutrition and the right microbiome. And now you're off to the races.
Right. Well, I'll tell you where what my approach is, because I think as a company and as a practice of chronic illness, you can't ignore that this manipulation of their hormones will set them in the right track. But what I've really found is, I know you just said it takes 6 weeks for that to really find that separation of decreased cravings, but especially when I'm doing give me 2 weeks of a really strict ketogenic journey. And then if you've got troubles, we're going to add this. But within a week, their gut really doesn't do I got to run to the bathroom. And their food cravings. Usually when on a ketogenic diet, we hear about this in week 3 or 4 of healthy people that they've got the wrong metabolism. We're trying to restore it by getting you a fat adapted. And when they have the bowel problems and we add acromantia, it is like a 1-2 punch within 7 to 10 days of starting that. They feel that restoration of, wow, I just have space in my brain for other thoughts besides food. It's really profound. And again, my approach to this has been, it's not that I never prescribe these GLP-1 injections, but when you look at the life the life for these patients when you've just said you're going to spend a grand a month and you're going to be on this forever, and taking you off of this is going to, you're missing some training wheels. If we set them on a ketogenic path, we use Akkermansia, use your product to say, let's get that gut biome to do our bidding. And I don't spend a lot of money on get a gut biome, get another one, do another. I've just learned, use this approach. I get 95% of the problems solved with this. And when the patients are still in what I say an advanced addiction, they get out to that 2 or 3 months. And those are the patients where I said, if you're still just really messing it up, like they just cannot find a rhythm, I can push the throttle of this hormone and it will help you. I do my best to say the life ahead is what is uncharted territories. Will I be able to help you get off of it? Will I be able to restore that? I think a lot of that is the mental health part of what GLP-1 does. So yes, it's going to lower A1C, and those are the first studies that are done. But what it does to gut, what it does to their mind is the part that I think is the gift back to a healthy life.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because I started my career working in pharma, and one of the things in pharma that you worry about is, does the product work? You have to have efficacy. And then you worry next about like, well, what are all the side effects that people are going to have to experience? And everybody knows that when you ever get on a drug, there's always the long list of side effects that you might experience. One of the things that I've learned about the microbiome is that when you improve people's microbiome, you get that benefit of efficacy on their, cravings or their GI and their and all that. But you get a bunch of these other side effects, which are all beneficial side effects. And so it's almost like a complete paradigm shift where if you can really improve the fundamentals of your gut functions, you actually have all these other things that come along for the ride that are improvements that you can feel. And so, like we said, the clarity of thinking, the sustained energy, the good sleep, the good bowel movements, the improved metabolism, the reduced food cravings. I mean, you get all these benefits that just come along with having these improved functions in the gut.
It's brilliant. Well, I really love your product. I know you sent me several papers that I've taken time to, it really validates several of the things where I'm like, I really see this on the front end. And to know that the improvements of a patient are actually coming out as scientifically evident in using your product. I think there's one last thing that I'll tell you where this conversation comes from. I think you are at least colleagues with Casey Means, who wrote the book, is it Good Energy? Yeah, Good Energy. And she's a friend of mine, and she and I are both like on a path to say, how do you actually get people away from prescriptions and back to health? I love the work she does. But as I was reading her book, and we were talking about what happens in that, the L cell, which is the specific cell in the gut that makes GLP-1. And there's this debate where she plays politics a little better than I do. She's like, you can have this kind of diet. You can have that. I'm like, you know what? I've been dealing with chronic illness for the last 20 years, and this is the best path forward to get that to go away. So I don't promote this high fiber diet. But one of the thoughts that's in her book, and what we've talked about, is in a ketogenic diet, there is, there's something called butyrate that your gut can make that's part of feeding your Akkermansia, but there's also a ketone when in your body called beta hydroxybutyrate. And in a ketogenic state, you have high levels of this in your body. So there's a theory that this also feeds the nourishment for that Akkermansia to do its job and turn on that production of GLP-1. Do you have any insight into whether that is true or not?
Well, we haven't done any studies looking at, as you know, we haven't done any studies looking at the ketogenic diet and these strains. Although I as you also know, I'm super interested in understanding that and what's really happening. From a scientific mechanism of action standpoint, it seems perfectly reasonable to imagine that that's what's happening, because at the end of the day, what really matters is the production of butyrate, which binds to these G protein coupled receptors on the L cells to stimulate GLP-1 hormone. the way in which you get to that butyrate is somewhat irrelevant, right? And so there can be and the body, as you know, is amazing in that it never just has plan A. It always has plan B, plan C, plan D. And so there are all these compensatory mechanisms to multiple ways that you can get to that small molecule. And so to the extent that there are different ways to get to butyrate, which is such an important small molecule when it comes to stimulating GLP-1, it wouldn't be surprising if your body had multiple plans and multiple pathways there. And so I do think that and this is part of your job, is figuring out like what is the right thing for the right person. And I'm not a clinician, but I would say from a scientific standpoint, it would be totally reasonable to assume that people can get to that butyrate production in multiple different ways. And to say like there's only one way to get there just doesn't match up with every other system we know about in our body.
Right. Well, Sean Baker and I had talked about this as well, saying, I mean, it truly does have this powerful improvement of how do we get people back to a healthy life. And, you know, Sean's on one side of being carnivore, and he gives a great testimonial life of how that looks. And you just can't avoid the number of patients who said, I know that's the life I used to live, but I do not eat bran muffins anymore, and I'm the healthiest I've ever been. And that's against what the guidelines are telling us to tell patients. So here we go. Welcome to the real world.
Yeah, welcome to the real world, and it's complicated and it's messy, and whatever you think you solved might not be true tomorrow. And so I just think that is, and the other thing too about the microbiome is we know that it changes as well. So we know that you can become depleted in some of these strains, certainly through taking antibiotics, but we also know that as we age, we become depleted in these strains. When we go through periods of intense stress, we become depleted in these strains. When we travel and our circadian rhythm changes, we become depleted in these strains. And when we women go through menopause, we become depleted in these strains. And so a lot of the metabolic issues that we face when we go through menopause are tied to the inability of our microbiome to A, interact with estrogen, and then B, to produce these things that are important for our GLP-1 hormone. So there's a lot of reasons why we might lose these strains. And the fact that you can get them back through a combination of diet as well as directly supplementing, these are just tools. And for each individual, we don't know what they need at what time. You do. I don't.
Right. No, I think it's perfect. It's the perfect summary to our conversation, because what I've learned in 25 years of seeing patients is don't show up with all the answers. Stay curious and listen. And it really is one of the most gifted roles in medicine, is when you are in a lane and that you are working through figuring something out, and the product you're using, it does what you said it was supposed to do, and the outcome for the patient is truly the gift of health moving forward. So I just, again, want to commend your company and your persistence for getting this really advanced drug to market without a prescription. God, that's so cool. And you deserve the success. So thank you for what you've done.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me and sharing all this information out with your audience.
Awesome.